When we talk about the Kyle Shanahan impact on DeMeco Ryans, we naturally talk about the offense. And why would we not? It's a very successful system. It's a system that, with Shanahan, has shown the success is not completely dependent on the quarterback. And it's a system that a lot of people have run for a long time at a high level in the NFL. And that's when we start talking about, what offensive coordinator is DeMeco Ryans going to bring in? Is it going to be someone from that Shanahan tree? Are they going to run that offense? And while that influence is very important, and it's still playing out in front of us, the most beneficial thing that Kyle Shanahan can teach DeMeco Ryans or talk to DeMeco Ryans about or provide some insight on, and heck, DeMeco Ryans lived it, is the situation he went into. Because it's impossible to completely find an identical comparison of what the Texans have gone through. A lot of self-inflicted wounds from the Bill O'Brien era to now. You can't find a identical comparison for Deshaun Watson wanting out, the off-field stuff, Bill O'Brien becoming king, Jack Easterby doing whatever the hell he was allowed to do, all the assets, etc., the aging core. You can't find an identical comparison. But there is a very similar comparison in San Francisco in the situation that Kyle Shanahan went into. And as you get into it, it becomes a little bit more fascinating. And it's got to be something that DeMeco Ryans can look at and probably learn from, because he does seem like a guy who learns a lot of stuff, and he's kind of a sponge. So let's just look closer at the two situations so that I can make the case for why these things are so similar. And it's the closest comparison, if you will, to what DeMeco is stepping into. San Francisco with Jim Harbaugh, they had a decent run of success. 3 NFC championships. I say decent, really good. 3 NFC championships in the Super Bowl. However, for whatever reason, maybe different reasons than why it crumbled down with Bill O'Brien, but the core got old. The quarterback situation got a little bit more shaky, and the front office decided to part ways with Jim Harbaugh. Same thing with Bill O'Brien. Lower level of success, division titles, but the front office, they parted ways with Bill O'Brien. And despite the success that O'Brien had and the success that Jim Harbaugh had, the organizations were in much worse shape when those guys left than they were when they arrived. And you had someone in charge that many people felt, and go back and listen to what people were saying about Jed York. Many people felt that they were in over their head. They were talking about they just inherited this situation. They didn't know what they were doing. And ownership had huge trust issues post Harbaugh and post O'Brien. So look at what each organization did. The 49ers, they went with a position coach who had no business being an NFL head coach, despite being very respected as a position coach. The press conference was a disaster. It was comical. It was laughable. And they went with Jim Tomsula. Texans went with David Culley, another position coach. Not too many people wanted the job at the time. Same thing in San Francisco. They went with David Culley. David Culley, the press conference, probably one of the worst press conferences I've ever seen in my life. It was awkward. Both of those guys, both Tomsula in 2015 and David Culley in 2021, they were one and done. Still in a tough spot when it came to assets, still kind of an aging core, probably some suspect contracts. What did the 49ers do? They went with a retread. They went with Chip Kelly. What did the Texans do? Texans went with Lovie Smith, a retread, had already coached 2 games. Obviously, 2 different levels of success, but 2 guys that probably nobody else in the NFL was going to hire. And how long did those guys last? They lasted a year. So everyone talks about the Texans having 2 one-and-done coaches as if it's just like unheard of. You only have to go back a half decade to see it happening in San Francisco. So you had 2 one-and-done coaches. Next, with Jed York being questioned, with Cal McNair being questioned, post O'Brien, post Jim Harbaugh, post 2 one-and-done coaches. Not the assets that you would hope, not the situation that you want to be in. Although the Texans right now, the assets, when you talk about draft equity and stuff, they're in a pretty good shape. What did they do? They went after the most sought after assistant coach on the market. San Francisco 49ers, they went down to Atlanta. They got Kyle Shanahan, who was a meltdown away from winning a Super Bowl. They brought in Kyle Shanahan, who had a lot of options. And despite the fact people were questioning San Francisco, people were talking about San Francisco having consecutive one-and-done coaches. People were talking about, what Jed York was going to do. As soon as he hired Kyle Shanahan, you really didn't hear any more about it. Things got better. Now, Kyle Shanahan, he won 6 games his first year and 4 the second before he got stuff going. But as soon as they hired Kyle Shanahan, all the stuff people were saying about Jed York, all the talk about one-and-done coaches, the struggles to get back to the level that they were at with Jim Harbaugh kind of went away because they hired the right guy here in Houston. Most sought-after guy during this coaching cycle, guy who everyone wanted. A guy who was competing for a championship, like Kyle Shanahan, who happened to work under Kyle Shanahan, DeMeco Ryans. You remember all the stuff people were saying about the Texans. Now, they were taking it to a whole new level unfairly. And by the way, that dialogue's kind of gone away. Haven't really heard any Stephen A. or Josina or Albright or anything like that. I haven't heard too much more of that. Seems like the Texans have kind of gotten praised because they hired the most sought after assistant. We're not hearing anything about one and done. We're hearing about excitement. We're hearing about all those things. And the McNairs are now being somewhat celebrated in the city. And it looks like the Texans might know what they're doing. Sounds like pretty similar situations. Identical? No. Different reasons why stuff crumbled? Yes. But I think that is something to at least look at. And it's got to be something that's at least crossed DeMeco Ryans' mind, because he does seem like a guy who's kind of a sponge for information. So maybe he looks at that. And the other thing to remember, Shanahan won 6-4 in year 1 and 2. Don't know if that's going to happen with DeMeco Ryans, but it's going to be a process. He's going to have the full trust, and he's going to be able to not only take some of the lessons that he learned from Kyle Shanahan schematically, but he's going to be able to take something and look at it with this organization. And I think Cal McNair can look at Jed York as well. Because people aren't talking about Jed York anymore, because after the one-and-done coaches, after the previous regime getting out of control for whatever reason, Cal McNair appears to have moved on. So as unique as the Texans situation is, there is somewhat of a similar comparison there. And DeMeco Ryans doesn't have to go far. There's been a lot of influences for DeMeco Ryans. We'll probably talk about some of the Super Bowl influences and what a couple of veterans who played with him had to say, what Andy Reid has said about him in the past. We'll do that a little later today, a little later tonight. In the Loop, we're going to get into the veteran quarterback discussion that we had yesterday. If the Texans don't draft a rookie quarterback, what quarterback would you want to bring in? What quarterback would want to come in here? Who makes sense? Could Davis Mills be something that you open your mind to? Not a big fan of it, but these are the type of discussions that we're having. And when you don't have control of the draft, that could be a serious issue. There's also something that we need to keep an eye on. And I'm going to get more into this today during the show. Download the Odyssey app. 10 to 2 Central is what time we're on. Best source for Texans content right here in the locker room and on the show. We're with the flagship. We get players, coaches, owner. We're in the building every game, so got you covered here. Spread the love too. Seems like there's a lot more digital content coming out, so just spread the love. Consume as much information as you can, because it's a fun time. But I do think there's something going on in Indianapolis that's going to impact the Texans, not just years down the line, but in the immediate as we creep towards 11 weeks away from the draft. Something going on in Indianapolis, and something that could happen in Indianapolis that deserves our attention, and it will allow us to analyze and maybe criticize the DeMeco Ryans hire down the line, and could potentially be a kick to the junk on draft day, just depending on how that shapes up. We'll talk about that. I'll put a video out on that. Subscribe, like, appreciate you for riding along. It is the Locker Room on YouTube. The comparison between the 49ers and Texans and Kyle Shanahan. There's a clear Shanahan impact But that is a very, very similar situation. No matter what happens, no matter who they draft, no matter who they hire, no matter who they sign, keep riding along in the locker room on In the Loop on Sports Radio 610, because when it comes to this Texan stuff, we are all in this together. Have a good one.